All right, welcome everyone to another Reltio community show. I always like to call them shows. Seems like it's better than a webinar. But this one's called Fast Track to MDM Excellence. So leveraging the Reltio way for reduced timelines and risks. We have Sarah Lyons. She's Director of Regional MDM Practice here at Reltio. Welcome, Sarah.
Hello.
It seems like it's been, what, a year? So I'm excited to have
Yeah.
you back on. Um, we're just talking about that. Time flies when you have fun. The rules of the show, keep yourself on mute. All questions, please ask those in chat. I will get to as many as possible during the show. Um, Probably will ask a few of them during it, but then the last 15 or so minutes we'll get to all of the questions because there's always really good questions. We are recording this and it will be posted to the Reltio community. I'll post the link here in a minute on where that will be. Um, so just so you know, we have lots of stuff coming up. So today's show, and then we have a show on enhanced security, reduced cost, the power of Reltio and private link. So if you have AWS and you want to look at more security, this is the show for you, and that's be on the 14th. And then on the 21st, we have one that I know that everybody will be interested in is redefining the user experience with Reltio's intelligent assistant. We're calling that RIA. Our leader in AI and ML will be on, and she'll be talking about that. Um, and then on the 28th, this one will be really fun as well, and I know will be super popular. Efficient, empowered, engaged, leveraging Reltio for UI for data steward success. Um, and then on the 19th, advancing patient health, the role of holistic patient data management and consent. So Deloitte will be doing that show. It's going to be more of a presentation than anything else. And then on the other shows that you see here, like on the 19th, 2nd, and the 16th, those are more training, so learning kind of things. So if you want to learn more about that, you can click into there and dive into Reltio virtual learning. So I think that's it for me. Yep. Let me stop sharing. And Sarah, let you kick it off.
Okay. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you, Chris. Yes, it's always fun to do a community show with you and see who turns up. I see some familiar names out there, so happy to see that. Those who don't know me, I'm Sarah Lyons. I'm a director with professional services at Reltio, like Chris said. I've been at Reltio for 7 years and in the MDM space in general since about 2006. And as most of you know, MDM is changing. So you're hearing Reltio shift from just focusing on MDM to talking more about data unification and activation. And MDM is just part of that. So it's also time to start thinking differently about how we implement. So on the PS team, we started a shift in thinking about a year ago. Like we said, it's the last time I did a show here, and that's when we first rolled out this Reltio Way Delivery Methodology, or the Reltio Ways, how we've started calling it now. So today, I want to take a little bit different spin and talk about some of the learnings and improvements over the past year. Obviously, how it can reduce timelines and risks, and then talk about how customers can use this beyond just a phase one or an MVP. Probably like the things on community here or other webinars or from your PS team, you've heard us talk about the 90-day MVP, but we really want to make it known that you can use this beyond your phase one or MVP also. All right, so we'll do just a real quick refresher on the methodology for those who are not already familiar, and then talk about how each component of the methodology really does mitigate risk. We'll share some real life examples from our implementations over the past year, and then go into what some of the updates and improvements we've made are. And then at the end, go back to that, how can you use this beyond MVP, which is really important because that's where you get into, this is continuously useful to you, not just for your phase one. And then if there's any time, we can take questions. Hopefully we will. So a short refresher, I always set the background that several years ago, PS was seeing a trend on almost all of our implementations and customers that were experiencing delays when implementing. And it came down to these four areas. And we just started calling these value blockers. So you'll hear us talk about those a lot if you're on an implementation with us. I think some of our partners have started using that too, just because we use it so often. But that's what a value blocker is basically a delay on implementation. And you can see the four common ones that we identified are access to data. Probably everyone on this call has experienced this, where you get on a project and you're ready to start, and then there's some kind of security protocol or approval you need to get access to that data. You need to load into Reltio or any other solution for that matter. The next one is data quality. We're seeing a trend where data quality issues were identified late in the implementation. So then you have a shorter amount of time to react and come up with a solution for whatever issue that data quality anomaly is causing. Data load delays. Some of this can be tied to the first two value blockers. And then another culprit of this is not having a firm decision or plan for an ETL tool or any kind of integration tool when the project starts. That was actually becoming very common on some of the implementations we're seeing. And then the last one was just overall customer readiness. And I put a couple bullet points here, but this really comes down to maybe the customer just wasn't prepared or did not understand everything that would be expected during an MDM implementation, which, the first time they go through one, how would they know? So readiness in general becomes a very important factor of success when you're going into an implementation. So after that analysis, and we identified those common value blockers, this is where we started to roll up our sleeves and start building this methodology. And the goal of the methodology, it's across the top of this slide. You'll probably see this a lot if you look at our materials. It's a prescriptive methodology that leverages proven implementation practices, and the proven is important here, and the Reltio velocity packs, which also came out last year, to continuously deliver value and positive business outcomes. So pretty straightforward. And it's built on three pillars. The first one is readiness, which I talked about on that previous slide as one of those value blockers. The second one is a framework. And this is a combination of the velocity packs and repeatable processes that can be used during the implementation, templates, implementation-specific documentation, and all of this is in the methodology library, which is available to you. So we'll talk about how you can access that if you don't already have that. And then the third pillar is an iterative approach to value. So again, we talk about the 90-day MVP, what the methodology started out to support. And even within those 90 days, we've identified 3 different milestones that upon the completion of these, it will demonstrate short increments of value, and each one builds on the other. Early and often is the phrase we always use when we're talking about delivering value for customers and up to their leadership. So we'll go into each one of those pillars in a little bit more detail, but talk about how each one can really mitigate risk. That's what I really want to focus on today. So when we talk about readiness, our goal is to prepare customers and partners to deliver Reltio data unification and MDM solution successfully and to achieve value fast. And that, again, seems pretty straightforward. I think sometimes it's the achieve value fast part of that statement that can be a challenge. Sorry, my screen just flipped over here. So what we did was we created a checklist. And I don't think we've ever actually pulled up this checklist on one of the community shows we've done before. So I'm going to do that right now. And again, everyone has access to this. You just may not have seen it before. So what this has is some really basic things that need to be completed before a project starts. And it includes things like making sure you have a requirements document and understanding what it takes in your organization to onboard a vendor. These are things that are really common, and I want to say, things that should be a given. But again, when you're going through the process of trying to start an implementation fast and pull everything together, people are going to forget things and might not understand how important some of these tasks are. We've also gone, and if you look at the top here, we've identified which ones should be required for the project start, which ones are required to meet those 3 value milestones that we'll talk about. So you can help prioritize your own internal team when you're going through each one of these and deciding, how long it's going to take, which is the highest priority. If you go down further, again, we've got making sure you have access to the source data so that that is ready to go on day one of the implementation. Usually there's a different owner. If you've got multiple sources, you can track this internally. Making sure you're going through the Reltio training. And we've called out the different roles that are typically on a customer project team. And you can track and make sure that they are taking that appropriate training. I always make the caveat statement, just because you go through this training, we do not expect everyone to be experts by any means. We know it takes hands-on experience to really gain that knowledge and skill set to be able to maintain this after a PS team or your partner team rolls off. But if you take this before the project starts, it gives you a foundation so that you understand what kind of knowledge transfer is being shared with you as you go through the implementation. And it just sets you up for success beyond that first phase. And it really makes sure that the solution is not a black box to you. We don't want that. We want you to feel like you're in control and can really own this going forward. I did want to call out, we do have the data integration plan on here. So, we just ask customers to make sure you understand what your strategy is. If it's documented, we can even take a look at that ahead of time before the project starts. I also will say Reltio is not experts in tools outside of Reltio, but we can comment on just basic architecture. And if you're maybe forgetting about a critical component of that design or something, but really just making sure that you've got a strategy in place and maybe most importantly, have chosen a tool. I'm really serious. I've been on several implementations where we start and a tool has still not been chosen. And going back to the risk mitigation, those are all things that can delay the project right out of the gate, like in week one. And if you're talking about a short 90-day or 100-day timeline, every day counts when you're working on that kind of schedule. So that's why the readiness is so important and why we've now put this together and we start sharing this with customers before the project actually starts so that they've got time to prepare. All right, so going back to that second pillar, which is the framework. So this is where, depending on your own internal processes and if there's any methodology that you may or may not use, this framework can really help reduce risk as it relates to the timeline and also the quality of the implementation. Because again, these are repeatable processes and documents that have already been created. Honestly, the PS team has been using these for years. And when we decided to create this formal methodology, we wanted to share that because on projects, we get a lot of questions from customers and partners just asking, hey, do you have this specific kind of template? Just so we don't have to create it on our own and take the time to do that. So that's why we wanted to make this public. So A couple things to call out here just for context or understanding. This visual shows, when Reltio implements a project, we break the timeline into phases. So visualize, which is, finalizing requirements. Model is more of design, going into construct. So there are phases that makes this look like a waterfall approach. But within these phases, we do operate in an agile and sprint mode. So that's where it can continue to reduce the timelines because we're delivering in short iterative sprints and can report on that in the 2-week intervals of your normal sprint timeline. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood it. It's not waterfall. So you are seeing progress and value continually, even through those phases.
Hey, Sarah, is the readiness checklist available for clients?
It is. Yes, that is available in the library for sure.
Great. What we'll do is I'll send it out to everyone as a follow-up in the next day or two. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. So I've listed some of the documents and assets that are part of the methodology library. This is not all of them by any means, but these are some of the more critical ones just to highlight and show you what's out there that could help you. Starting with the MVP project plan and MVP user stories. This is a really robust plan and set of detailed user stories that includes every task you need to implement phase 1 or an MVP. You can download them, you can edit them for your specific entity types or attributes that you are configuring on top of the pre-configured velocity pack. And, both of them make sure that you're not missing any task that needs to happen as part of the MVP, which again, if you identify that late, that can cause delays. You might be rushing to finish up a user story pretty quickly, and then you can run into the quality issues too. The user stories specifically, as a project manager, I really like this template because you can just make a few edits and upload it into Jira or Rally or whatever tool you're using to manage your sprints. And it saves so much time. So that is really useful. And again, these can be reused for post MVP. So we'll talk about that at the end. The next two, requirements and functional test case document. So these are not just templates. These are actual documents that have requirements that support a out-of-the-box velocity pack and the test cases associated with it. So it doesn't go beyond the out-of-the-box functionality. You would have to add to that if you have additional requirements, but these are really useful for customers who might not be working with a partner or are struggling to get their requirements documented. It can show you what's supported out of the box. And if you need to add to it, you can, but it's a starting point. And usually once teams start to see that, it will trigger more things that they know they want to add to it. So it can really jumpstart that process if your team is spinning on that. The Go Live Readiness Assessment, despite its name, this is actually reviewed at the end of every one of these phases. And this document specifically was created to mitigate risk. And it lists common tasks that need to happen during each phase. And at the end of every phase, the team will regroup, review it, see what has not been done. Requirements, as an example, is always listed at the end of the visualize phase if those are completed. If they're not, that will be called out as a risk at the end of every phase through the implementation. So seeing that on paper, it's an easy way for you to report that up to your leadership if you need to escalate any of these risks. And I mean, just maybe it's human nature. It seems to resonate more in this document that you can share with your leadership if you need to, as opposed to just being like a line item on a status report where it can get lost. So customers have said that this has really helped bring visibility to risks and helping them get resolved. The feedback document template, this is one that is it's a deliverable of Reltio PS when we are engaged on a project. We know there's engagements that happen where customers lead it themselves or a partner might lead it and PS is not engaged. So you'll see this when PS is engaged. And essentially it's like a running audit, if you will, about every recommendation that the PS team would give to you throughout the entire implementation. So a lot of times those happen like in phone calls or different meetings, sometimes in emails. So it's easy to lose those recommendations. This is consolidated in one document. And how this mitigates risk, I like this one because it mitigates risk even after we roll off. So if you encounter an issue, for example, after the PS team disengages, maybe it's a performance issue, this is one of the first places you can refer back to and look and see, okay, was there any kind of configuration we did that PS called out this could cause a performance issue in the future? Some common things are like if you configure a match rule a certain way, we might say, okay, it's against best practice. We understand why you have to do it, but this is the potential impact it could cause as your volume grows. Again, as an example. So it can help with troubleshooting, especially if you're in a production environment. Everyone wants to get those prod issues resolved as quickly as possible. So that's where that can really come in helpful and mitigate risk after the engagement's over even. And then the last one, this is a new template. It's introduced the last half of last year. And this is a fun one. At the high level, this is something that the architect can walk through in the design phase. And basically, there's inputs to this template that can be entered, and they're driven by your design, what attributes you have, your volume, and it can provide a rough estimate. Now, again, I'll say a rough estimate, not a final answer, but an estimate of the latency you can expect. And this is important because previously teams weren't really able to talk about any kind of expectation around performance or talk about what impacts performance. So this brings that conversation forward to the design phase versus waiting until a data load actually happens. So if there are any requirements or configuration we need to revisit, we have more time to react. So that reduces risk to the timeline as well. I know, Chris, that was a lot of information. Are there any questions you want to call out?
The only questions really is where can I find these documents? And my answer is I'm going to be sending out all of this information in an email in the next day or two, including the video or the presentation. Thank you.
Great. Okay, the last pillar is this iterative approach to recognizing value. And you might not think intuitively that this is a risk mitigator, but it really is. So we call out these three value milestones. And I want to take this view on this slide. It's the same three value milestones, but it goes into a little more detail. So again, this is an example using your 90-day MVP, but you can reuse these milestones for future phases also. The first one, it can happen as early as week 3 or 4 in a 12-week timeline project. And this is all about just loading your first data set so you can view it in the data quality dashboard. And it reduces risk in a couple of different ways. One, most obvious, if you hit this in week 3 or 4, it just gives you an indication that you're on track for your schedule. If you were not able to complete data profiling for some reason, this is a huge risk mitigator because it allows you to possibly identify some data quality issues before going into any design sessions. There have been times where data profiling hasn't been able to be completed, and we'll design a match rule, for example, and then we find out later when we load data that one of those attributes isn't heavily populated. So we'll have to go back and do some rework. So the DQ dashboard is not a full-blown data profiling tool by any means, but if you're not able to do that data profiling step, then this, again, it can just mitigate risk of not knowing one of those data quality issues exists later on when there's less time to react. And thirdly, if you can hit this, it raises confidence in the project. I'll just be really transparent. Uh, we've heard comments that, okay, this is great, but it's not really like providing a whole lot of value if you already know your data quality is high, there's no issues. But there have been multiple projects where that kind of had been the stance on this first value milestone. But when we actually were able to load data that quickly, everyone, including the leadership, was very excited. I think there was one case where we loaded 100 million records in week 4 or 5, and that customer had been through an MDM implementation before, but even they were impressed and they really celebrated that because historically, if you've done MDM implementations before, that's a big achievement to get a milestone like that out of the way that fast. Um, and when you've got that confidence and momentum, it can prevent your project from going on the back burner in terms of priority, which we've also seen happen, unfortunately. The second milestone, this is having your Reltio ID and the consolidated profiles generated in test. So it's not in production yet, but again, it can give you an indicator that you are on track for your schedule. And one thing that customers have called out that this has helped with and mitigated planning on the back end is if you're using your full volume, this gives you an indication of what your data remediation effort's going to be. So you can start planning for that if you haven't already in week 6 versus week 10 here when the deployment actually happens. So again, it's having more time to react, more time to plan. You're not rushed to figure out a solution or a plan to address the number of potential matches you're going to have. And the last milestone, so this is taking those IDs and profiles, and it's the migration of those to production. So you're in your live environment, and it's consumed by at least one downstream application for the MVP. Obviously, that's going to grow, but that's kind of what we target for an MVP, if that will fit within your needs for your implementation. And again, it's a small step towards value in terms of your larger business initiatives. Um, but it shows you and your leadership team that this can be accomplished in a short amount of time. And it can lay the foundation and a roadmap for, okay, we got this done in 90 days. Our next phase, we're going to onboard our next 3 sources and next 3 downstream consuming applications. And really show you tangible evidence that this can be accomplished in a shorter period of time. Again, historically, MDM implementations, I've been on some that have taken 2 years to implement before the customer sees any value. So breaking it up into those shorter increments, building on the value iteratively, um, it, it gains the confidence, keeps your project moving forward, and really instills confidence in your entire organization that this can be done. And the organization is able to realize tangible value on the investment you made because someone made a decision to invest a lot of money in this. And the quicker the implementation team can show that, the happier everyone is. And it just validates that that right decision was made. All right. So what have we learned in the past year? First, I want to share some wins. We've tracked these on the projects that Reltio has led. Again, there's projects where customers will self-implement. There's projects where our partners lead the implementation and PS might not be involved. Our partners are experts in delivery in their own right. So there might be some wins like this out there that we haven't heard about yet. So if you have any, share them. We love to hear about that. But these are some that we have observed. One, we got data loaded and viewed in that DQ dashboard in 19 days from our project start. And in this case, we were able to help the customer identify an address quality issue. And they were able to start remediating that in the source system in less than 20 days from when we started. So that by the time, the goal was by the time the project had finished, they would have that completely finished. Again, in past career or past jobs, solutions I worked with, you're not able to identify that kind of issue until really late in the project or until after the deployment happens. So then you have to do the data remediation after the deployment. It delays getting value and data stewards being able to do everything they need to do. So again, it's just expediting that value realization. We had another one where it was a global customer, so data from all over the world, full volume of 200 million records, and we had that loaded within 6 weeks of starting the project. So a little bit longer timeline than the regular 90-day MVP, just because of some volume and complexity. But being able to load that in 6 weeks really instilled confidence with the customer. So it really built momentum again with that project. And then the last one, this is the shortest bullet point here, but it's one of my favorites. We were loading data within 6 days from the project start. And this one, that customer took this very seriously. They made sure everything on that readiness checklist was completed before they engaged us and started burning their time and honestly their budget that they were paying the PS team. So 6 days was a big accomplishment and really celebrated there. And again, just wins like these, it starts showing that it might be small value, but it's possible, and that it's possible to continually build on that incrementally. And it makes the customers that are on the implementation team look like heroes to their organization and their leadership, which is one of our favorite things to hear at Reltio. We like to help you do that.
Sarah, a couple questions, and one you might not be able to answer, and so, but I'll try anyways. Can you explain why Reltio profiles and IDs are not needed viewing activity on the data quality issue? Is that, I don't know if that's really something you would answer.
Um, no, I understand the question. So
Okay,
the data quality dashboard, I don't know if who asked that has seen the
Jeff.
DQ dashboard. You can look, so the DQ dashboard will show you metrics around the consolidated profiles and potential matches. But for this milestone only, we really look at the attributes that are populated. So we don't use all of the functionality of the DQ dashboard, if that makes sense. And we're really specifically looking at completeness and anomalies in the data for the attributes in the data model.
Okay, I think that's clear. And Jeff, if there's other questions, please post.
Yeah,
Um,
you can follow up too if you have follow-up questions.
um, is the week three like the first milestone, assuming that entities and relationships exist out of the box, or does customer need to create them from scratch?
No, that's a good question. So what that assumes is even if you are not going to end up with the pre-configured solution, we load the data the first time using that with the understanding, and customers ask this all the time, with the understanding that that data model is almost always going to be modified in some way. But if we can load that quickly, again, it gets visibility to the data. And then we've also got data in Reltio already, so that as we're working through design, if we want to demo a couple of different options or try different things to see what that data would look like based on different configurations, the data is already in there. And it's ideally, unless there's some kind of restriction, it's your real data, so it will really resonate with you as we're going through those design sessions.
Thanks. And then Jeff did say, he goes, basically seems like number three is needed to deliver number two.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yep. Okay. So going on to some of the learnings. This is where I've said, I know I sound like Captain Obvious here, but one of the things that just was really validated with us is readiness is even more important than we thought. When we started to put more focus on this, we just really were able to tie almost all of our delays back to readiness. So again, things like making sure requirements are documented, trainings completed, that the customer team resources are allocated correctly and properly. And we'll share, and I know partners will talk through this with customers as well, like what's needed from your team so that you have a good understanding of that. One of the most common scenarios I think I've seen is a customer will have resources allocated to their project, but then a production issue on a separate application happens and they get pulled for that because obviously it's a high priority production issue. But then that can slow down work on your Reltio engagement. So that's a challenge that, you know, it's always there. It's something to balance, but we'll try to plan out where your resources would be needed and what allocation so that you can hopefully prioritize that for them. And then going back to the integration strategy, that is just proving to be more and more important that you have a solid plan for that going into implementations. So because of that, we have made some improvements over the past year. And again, this is not all of them. There have been things like tweaks to some of the user stories that we've made that aren't necessarily on here. You know, updating some documentation with newer functionality that I haven't included every single document on here. These are just the really big ones to be aware of. We made updates to that readiness checklist. The version I showed is, I think, maybe version 3 since we rolled this out at the beginning of the year. So we were trying to make updates as we learned them so as many people as possible could take advantage of them. We are continually reviewing that readiness checklist and same with the standardized requirements documents. After we got through a couple implementations over the year, we made updates to the standardized requirements document. And what we are doing with the methodology is, you know, over this first year, we were doing updates on about a monthly basis. And now our goal is to align updates to the methodology with the product release schedule. So, you know, every time there's one of those major releases, we will publish any updates to the methodology that are relevant to new functionality or just any other feedback we've gotten throughout the year. So you can kind of set that expectation also that every new release, the methodology will be updated with the latest and greatest as well. I already talked about the API latency template. Again, that was a very good addition to the library this year. And this is one, not everyone might know about this. Reltio PS, we will do a internal architecture review board for every project that we're leading. A lot of times it's internal, but customers are welcome to join if you want to. A lot of times, if it's not a complex architecture, they don't feel the need to, but if you want to, you're more than welcome to. And we've made updates to the presentation template just to make sure that we are discussing things like the API latency template and even things like the customer's test strategy based on their complexity and maybe performance SLAs. We'll just make sure that we're reviewing that also and making any recommendations that are relevant to that. Things we are working on right now, like today, that will be coming very soon. I will also say we run the methodology like a project of our own. We've got a backlog of all the feedback and updates that we want to make. We prioritize them on a monthly basis and go through and assign them to sprints. So when I say it's coming soon, this is planned for like this quarter. Additional improvements to readiness, and this will really kind of take things a step deeper and help customers understand more what will be expected of them during implementations. Like not just a resource plan, but these are the kinds of questions your implementation team will be asking you. These are considerations. Just again, to get a more clear picture of what this really means for you and your organization. Maybe give you an idea of some of the change management you're going to have to be in charge of and handle through the implementation. So look for that soon. We're also making continuous improvements to that requirements document. I already mentioned that. And then I think this will be really helpful too. We've got some implementation guides that we're working on. And so our documentation portal has excellent information about product functionality. I know it's really helpful. Kudos to the documentation team here. They've made a lot of improvements on that over the past few years. But we have gotten feedback that sometimes there are certain nuances during an implementation that, takes an extra consideration that's maybe not in the product documentation out on the portal. So PS has started creating some guides. One that we are very close to rolling out is a D&B connector implementation guide. So it will walk you through the steps of, how to set up the connector, how to implement it, which the doc portal does, but it's also got like some gotchas, I'll say, and specific things to check that the PS team and customers have learned through many, many years of implementations. So it's documentation through the lens of an implementation specifically. So we've got, like I said, DMB connector, SFDC connector. There's one on match analysis that is coming very soon. And then you'll see more of those get rolled out. So we'll make an announcement also when those are released and available on the library as well. And I will say, once Chris sends out this link and how to access the methodology, there is a link to provide feedback. It goes straight to a repository that we review, like I said, on a monthly basis. And I'll say like 95% of the feedback and updates we've made to the methodology comes from feedback from customers and partners. So we really do review that and listen. So once you've got access to that, if you don't already, make sure to send any feedback you've got. I always get happy when I get that notification. So we want to hear that. Okay, so how does this help beyond the MVP? Like I said, I know we talk about the 90-day MVP a lot. I hear this question all the time, two-part question. I've already gone through the first phase of my implementation before this methodology was published. Or, I've been a customer for 3 or 4 years already. My tenants weren't provisioned with a velocity pack. We implemented before that. So can either one of these really help me? And 100% yes. The methodology, the Reltio way, you can still leverage what is out there on the library, no matter what phase you're in, if you are on a velocity pack or not. And this is just one slide because it's not complicated. Hopefully good news, it's really easy. So let's take the two scenarios. If you are post MVP, so common post MVP phases are adding additional sources or adding a new entity, maybe some new attributes. You can use the same work streams and user stories that we have for those work streams for your post MVP or post one phase. Again, I don't know if everyone has seen this, so we'll pull this up. This is the user story template. And it looks like a lot of information, but this is actually why it can save so much time. There's a tab for each module you need to consider through an implementation. So there's a module for readiness again, this module for loading data and viewing the DQ dashboard, one for data model. And you can see there's detailed user stories here. So if you're in a phase 2 or phase 3, and say you're adding another source or you're adding a new entity, you can review each one of these modules, determine which one is relevant for you. They might not all be if you're in a phase 2 or phase 3, but the ones that are, like this user story, so document the customer specific attributes. Again, that's applicable for phase 1, 2, 3, any phase for what you're adding. Configuration of the defined entities. just specify in here what new entity you're configuring. You can remove the user stories that aren't relevant and then upload this into Jira. And you've got your user stories. So you know what tasks are needed regardless of what phase you're in. And again, there's a lot of these will be relevant for future phases. Match rule configuration and tuning. This is a good example. So if you're adding new sources, but it's the same entity type, you might not need to go through the two full iterations of match tuning that are called out here. But maybe you would do one iteration of match tuning just to verify that match rules don't need to change based on the new data source that you're loading. So in that case, you can just remove the iteration 2 stories, update this with any new information. If you want to call out the entity type, so the person that's assigned the user story, it's more clear to them. You can make whatever edits you want and then upload this, and you've got your user stories loaded in there. So that's just one way you can leverage this. There's an associated project plan that also has all of these tasks included on it. You can modify that. So again, really help expedite the planning and mitigate risk around the quality to make sure that you're not missing an important task. I will call out, there's also a document in the methodology library that goes through the process of onboarding a source also. So that's another asset out there that can help you post MVP. There are some integration user stories. So if your phase 2 or 3 consists of, some of that downstream integration or integration of additional inbound sources, we've got user stories for Reltio Integration Hub. Like I mentioned, we will not do development for a tool that's not a Reltio product, obviously. So if you're using Reltio Integration Hub, the stories are there. They might need to be modified. And honestly, you can review those even if you're using another tool, and it might still give you a foundation for your integration user stories. You can review it, see if there's anything out there that you could reuse if it's not a Reltio Integration Hub. And again, we're constantly adding more user stories and modules to that template. So our goal is to eventually have user stories like for all of our connectors also. I think you saw there are user stories for Snowflake connector, but we've got SFDC, GBQ, and DMB in the backlog as like the next higher priority. But the goal is to continually build this out. So there's more ways you can leverage it post MVP. And then the second part of that question, all right, what if you implemented your first phase before velocity packs were introduced? So the approach is still the same. And you can, that user story template and all the other assets, you can still use those on a phase 2 or 3 if you're not on a velocity pack. And the thing to really remember about this is that when a customer is implementing the MVP or phase 1, if they are provisioned with a velocity pack, we always guide them to stay as close to the pre-configured solution as possible. Again, it's a risk mitigator to your timeline to keep the complex configuration for a later phase and just make your goal getting that first value as soon as possible. So when a customer on a velocity pack is in a phase 2 or 3, they're really focusing on making some of those more complex updates to the velocity pack configuration anyway. So someone who's on the velocity pack and is not is really, it's equal ground when you get to a phase 2 or 3. So I don't want you to think that just because you're not on a velocity pack, you can't leverage this and that it can't help reduce your timeline or risk. Like I said, the same user story template, you can apply that in the same way. What might vary, I'll say, is a difference in your configuration effort, but that's really driven by the complexity of your scope, whether you're on a velocity pack or not. All right. That was really all the information I had. I know we're a couple minutes early, so I don't know if there's more questions or you want to go back and reiterate anything. Hopefully, this has helped and at least brought some more transparency to what's out there and available for you all.
Sarah, that was really good. I don't see any other additional questions.